This is the Thanks for Sharing podcast, the podcast exploring all things recovery, healing, and relationships. Remember to subscribe and download episodes where you listen to podcasts. You can find us directly on our social media pages, Healing Paths Recovery, or directly on our website, www.healingpathsrecovery.com. And while you're there, please leave a review. Before I begin today's episode, I want to share with you why I decided to record a podcast episode about Epstein. I know some people who were largely unfamiliar with the Epstein case. I acknowledge there were also a lot of other people who were very aware of it and were advocating for the release of the Epstein files. For me, I heard about this case years ago. I was familiar with the journalist and reporter Julie Brown from Florida, where Epstein got his sweetheart deal and was sentenced, I will use that word lightly, to house arrest. He was able to freely move about, and it is reported that during that time, he accumulated more victims. So I was aware then and have followed the story as information became available. And then I feel like this year, 2025, the case has exploded. And I don't know that there's very many people who are unaware. I have continued to listen to what people who are knowledgeable with details and with victims are saying about this. I've listened to an attorney who is the attorney for many of the Epstein victims. I've listened to interviews with Virginia Giuffre's family members, her siblings. I've listened to interviews with the journalist, Julie Brown in Florida. I've also listened to interviews with the person who helped her write her memoir. And if you are not familiar with Tara Palmieri and her work, I would suggest heading over to her Substack account or her YouTube channel, The Tara Palmieri Show. On Substack, it's The Red Letter. And follow the work that she has been doing and is still doing. She got to know Virginia Giuffre well as they went around to different people who would have had knowledge and could validate Virginia's experience. I'm not claiming that I am an expert in any way on these things. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a reporter. This story is deeply painful. And I think for anybody who is aware of it, they feel pain and sorrow around this case, and especially deep sorrow for the victims. I decided maybe a month ago that I wanted to do a podcast about it. If you've been a listener for a while, I hope that one of the things that you've learned about me is if I'm going to talk about something that's in the news or that isn't in the field of psychology or my clinical experience, I tend to cover those things in a way that honors the lane that I am in as a licensed clinical mental. I have worked with clients who have experienced sexual exploitation. I have sat with them in their pain. It's been a privilege for me to be part of and witness the journey they go on to try to heal and reclaim what was stolen from them. And I think I am also, I don't know if this is how my brain was wired to work. I don't know if I learned this during my graduate program and working with clients. Because honestly, I graduated with my master's degree when I was 25 and started working in the field clinically in 1995. I do have references myself prior to becoming a therapist or going to grad school. And even when I was much younger, looking at dysfunction that was happening in my own family system and seeing, I would say, early signs of seeing it systemically. And as I've become familiar with this case, that's another lens that I bring, looking at this situation, the horror of it, the repulsion of all of it through a systemic lens. And I'll do that in this podcast episode. have thought a lot about this, and I will jot down phrases that come to my mind, some of them in reaction to things that I have listened to. Sometimes I go back and I edit or I rewrite that. And you will hear a lot of that in my final draft of things that I have written down in this episode. I've said before in my podcast episode, I think it took me a long time to find the wording to describe my experiences growing up and even my wording as a therapist. I had wording, but I knew it was somewhat inadequate. And I think talking about this case, the words are somewhat still inadequate. I've said before in podcast episodes that somewhere in my 40s, I think some of the language that I had been looking for or searching for previous to that started to crystallize into my head. And I started to use that language in a way that felt like what I was looking for. I will say up front that this episode is not about scandal. It is not about sensational stories or shock value. It is also not about partisan politics or conspiracy debates. This episode is about trauma, power, vulnerability, and the systems that protect harm. Whether you have followed the Epstein case closely or never paid attention, whether you watch the news or avoid it, whether you vote, don't vote, feel politically passionate or politically exhausted, this conversation is for you. Because what we're exploring today is not just a case, it's a mirror. It's about how we protect the vulnerable, how we define power, what we believe about safety, and who we instinctively trust and doubt in our culture. Watching the coverage of this case, the interviews for years now, and especially watching it this past year, brought me language that I felt inadequate before. And jotting down my thoughts, thinking about them, thinking about how I phrased it, what was missing, what felt like it was still inadequate, helped me not just distill the thoughts that I was having about this particular case into language. I think it also gave me language that I have had from different books I've read, different articles I've read, listening to other people speak about it, but also still felt inadequate in myself to fully convey around patriarchy. In the past, I would recommend people read the books because I didn't have the language. Eventually, I could start to talk about the language, but in a way that still felt inadequate. Listening to the coverage of this case brought somewhat abstract knowledge into clearer language for me. I do want to say that everything I share in this episode comes from public record, survivor testimony, reporting, trauma theory, and the lived experience of those who were harmed. Some of this may be challenging. It will probably stir emotion. Please move at your pace and honor your body and your nervous system as you listen. We cannot heal what we are unwilling to see. And in this episode today, we are choosing to see clearly with courage and compassion. So let's begin. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's episode discusses sexual exploitation, trafficking, grooming, power abuse, and institutional complicity. No new allegations are being made, but please care for your nervous system as you listen. We're talking about Epstein, exploitation, power, trauma, and the systems that protect predators. Everything in this episode draws from public record, survivor testimony, trauma psychology, and historical power systems, as well as my clinical expertise. This episode is about truth, about culture, about trauma, and power, not salacious scandal. Some people might ask, why am I talking about this? And I will tell you why. When people hear the name Jeffrey Epstein, they think scandal, conspiracies, headlines, sex. But this isn't a sex scandal. This is a trauma story, a power story, a systems story, and a mirror held up to our culture. And yes, this conversation lies squarely in my lane as a trauma therapist who works in relational harm, power dynamics, consent, and recovery. I work with process addiction, substance addiction, and relational trauma. Let me be explicit. What Epstein did was not about sex addiction. Sex addiction involves consenting adults. This was sexual exploitation, grooming, trafficking, coercion, predation, psychological captivity, and a system built to protect power, not people. This was power weaponized against vulnerability. I believe we cheapen language and minimize real harm when we use words like addiction to describe predation. We don't protect survivors by softening the language around predation. And what Epstein did was not about intimacy or desire. It was about possession and entitlement. Victims weren't partners. They were property, supply currency. This was not compulsion. It was strategy. Not lust, domination. Not addiction, exploitation. Predators like Epstein don't chase sex. They chase supremacy. They don't seek closeness. They seek control. When a person cannot feel powerful internally, they try to own the world externally. But who gets protected? Wealthy, powerful adult men who are targeting vulnerable teenage girls. Had these girls been daughters of senators and CEOs, this story unfolds differently and decades sooner. Instead, we saw the age-old cultural script. She was troubled. She wanted money. She knew what she was doing. She's lying. This case is a class issue. The victims were not daughters of powerful men. If these girls had been from wealthy families, white, private school teens, the world would have burned. But vulnerable girls become disposable in a system built to shield the powerful. Vulnerability was weaponized against victims. Power was treated as character. Predators know exactly who society refuses to defend, and they go there. If we look at this through the attachment lens, healthy development looks like a foundation rooted in safety. Safety, consistent over time, builds security. And from safety and security grows trust. Add on to that intimacy, closeness, and shared power. Epstein, on the other hand, like many predatory personalities, skipped safety and intimacy entirely. Some highly privileged individuals bypassed relational safety and jumped straight to pursuing external security through wealth and control. They never learned felt safety. So they build power instead of connection. However, without internal safety, there is no true power. So instead, they pursue external insulation, wealth, secrecy, isolation, handlers, other people as an emotional buffer, and entitlement instead of an identity. This isn't strength. It's fear wearing a lot of layers of influence. It's what happens when someone never learned how to regulate power, only to take it and search for more. I think we have to ask ourselves an important question. Why did America fall for this? We are socially groomed in this country to believe Wealthy, powerful men are trustworthy. These girls were groomed to believe powerful adults would help them. Both were lies. But let's talk about grooming as a cultural process, because this isn't just individuals grooming other individuals. This is a predatory system grooming society, and we have to start wrestling with these difficult truths if it's ever going to be different. We have to ask ourselves, why do we reflexively trust status? Why do we hesitate to question the powerful? Why and how do we silence victims? And why do we doubt them? They are more like us than we are like the powerful. But we also know that families protect the abusive uncle to avoid disruption or family shame. So countries protect abusive billionaires for the same reason: comfort over truth. As a therapist, I say we have to learn how to identify real safety, not perceived power. Healing relational trauma is preventative and will protect society. Critical thinking is a protective factor. And teaching youth bodily autonomy, boundaries, and discernment is an absolute must if we want to live in a different world. Our society often mistakes wealth and charisma for strength. But real strength doesn't require subservience. These men look powerful because they have resources. But let's be honest, these men are not strong. They are fragile and emotionally unequipped for intimacy and accountability. Real strength can tolerate discomfort. Real strength doesn't require harming someone smaller to feel big. If your ego collapses without control, secrecy, or dominance, you are not powerful. You are hollow. And emotionally, these people are brittle, unchallenged, terrified of vulnerability, defended against shame, and allergic to accountability. Predators don't display masculinity. They display fragile ego with a lot of resources and money. So why are they attracted to the taboo? Why is there an escalation? When the nervous system cannot feel safety internally, it starts to seek intensity externally. For predators like Epstein, the forbidden is exciting. The vulnerable are targets. Secrecy is safety, and violation is proof of their power. And when shame threatens their illusion, they don't repair. They rewrite the world around them to maintain superiority. Dr. Jennifer Freyd coined the term DARVO, and she defined it as the operating system of abusers that deny the abuse, attack the accuser, and cast themselves as the victim. And when you add wealth and institutions, it becomes weaponized. We've seen it. We see it repeatedly in predation cases. This isn't immaturity. It's deliberate identity protection. And institutions follow suit with their PR teams. Legal intimidation. They get the media to frame it in a light favorable to them. There's NDAs and access to political power. No individual can harm alone. Predators require systems for all of this to work and to be kept secret. Some of the things that I've heard as I've listened to the coverage that's available, and I understand it, people wonder why these girls didn't run. Why did Virginia Giuffre say that she cared for him? It's not that hard to understand. This isn't compliance. It's captivity and trauma bonding. When a child never felt safe, control will feel like connection. They bond to the person who appears to offer survival, even when that person is the danger. And that bond is not based on love. It's the nervous system trying to stay alive. Trauma bonding is not loyalty. It is survival. When you grow up without safety, as Virginia openly shared that she did. Attachment becomes your only survival strategy. Predators pick children who already know what it means to attach to danger for protection. The victims didn't stay. They survived the adults who failed them before and after the abuse. That is not consent. It's an attachment formed in captivity. It's resilience, not complicity. And society mirrors the victim dynamic. Victims bond to power because they have no safe alternative. Society bonds to power because it fears losing stability. We often bond to authority, thinking and believing he's successful. He must be good. She's lying. Why would a man like that do this? He has influence. He wouldn't risk it. We confuse status with ethics and wealth with worthiness. And we need to talk about patriarchy here. Not as a buzzword, not as a hashtag, but as a hierarchy of human worth. A system designed to determine whose body matters and whose body is available. Because Epstein is not an anomaly. He is not a lone monster or a shocking exception or a bizarre outlier. He is an expression of a system that has existed for centuries, one that rewards men for dominance and punishes them for humanity. Patriarchy did not start with governments or empires. It began at home. Before men could own land, before they could own labor, before they could own black and brown bodies, they had to learn to own women. Women were the first territory, the first dispossession, the first bodies claimed as proof of status. Once the world accepted that a woman could be owned, that her body existed for male access, that her autonomy could be subordinated to male desire, the template for every future hierarchy was set. From women to children, to enslaved people, to laborers, to anyone considered less than. Patriarchy is not simple male authority. It's a ranking of human value with white, wealthy men at the top, and everyone else arranged beneath them by usefulness, obedience, and silence. And here's the psychological truth. Patriarchy didn't create confident men. It created men terrified of being equal. In a patriarchal system that entitles men to power, equality isn't just unwelcome, it's terrifying. Because equality means they are no longer above. It means they are simply human again. Before patriarchy gave men power, it took their humanity. It amputated vulnerability and relational truth. It severed them from tenderness, interdependence, and emotional truth, the very qualities that make intimacy possible, and replaced them with dominance, emotional rigidity, and the compulsive need to prove superiority. This is why men like Epstein do not seek connection. They seek hierarchy. They don't crave intimacy. They crave power. They do not chase girls to feel desired. They chase girls to be seen by other powerful men as dominant, untouchable, and above consequence. Women, adult women, are not the audience in male sexual dominance. Other men are. Wealthy, white, male predators do not perform sexual exploitation to impress women. They perform it to impress each other. It is not sexual desire, it is status signaling, a currency of dominance inside elite patriarchal culture. Because in this system, women are not partners, they are props. Sex is not about desire, it is about proof. And power is not grounded, it is hollowed and terrified. And worth is measured not in humanity, but in hierarchy. So why girls? In this system, women are possessions, status symbols. But girls are currency. Girls represent purity to violate, vulnerability to crush, innocence to conquer, rules to break, and futures to steal. Targeting girls is not desire, it is proof. Proof of dominance, proof of impunity, proof of access beyond consequences. Women are trophies, but girls are the ultimate receipt of power. A girl's body becomes the evidence a man uses to signal to other powerful men, I am beyond morality. I am above consequence. I can destroy innocence and remain untouchable. Women are not the audience, men are. And this is not eroticism. It is empire behavior. It is hierarchy enacted on the smallest bodies. And systems like that don't collapse when one man falls. They collapse when we stop believing in the hierarchy itself. Patriarchy taught them that others' obedience is safety. Vulnerability is danger. And power is the only shield against shame. But patriarchy did not make men powerful. It created men terrified of being ordinary, terrified of vulnerability, terrified of being equal, and terrified of ever being just human. It hollowed them first, and then handed them domination as compensation for the self they lost. And as long as we continue to confuse dominance with strength, we will mistake trauma for leadership and exploitation for success. Real strength does not require someone beneath you. Real power is not afraid of equality. Real humanity does not fear being human. The world we are building, the one survivors are demanding, doesn't just protect women and children. It returns men to themselves. We also know that patriarchy does not survive on men alone. It recruits women too, especially those who have been taught that proximity to power is the only safety available to them. Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't tricked. She wasn't coerced. She participated. She recruited. She groomed. And she weaponized femininity as credibility and access. That isn't empowerment. It's alignment with the oppressor to avoid powerlessness. Patriarchy would rather use women against women than ever let women stand alongside powerful men. This system protects power, never people. And we're still watching power protect itself. There has been public talk and demand for releasing Epstein's files, for supporting victims, transparency, and accountability. And yet we see delay, procedural hurdles, partial disclosures, redactions. The government of the most powerful country in the world shut down right as the final signature was needed to force release, all while invoking protecting victims as justification. The truth is, victims are asking for full release. It's the power that's resisting full transparency. And when the people guarding the gates also guard the secrets, survivors are not protected. The predators are. Most humans struggle to admit they are wrong. But when men reach a level of power where they never have to, they disconnect from reality. M. Scott Peck wrote, "Mental health is a commitment to reality at any cost." These men commit to avoidance at any cost. They build a world of mirrors, not windows, surrounded by people who affirm their greatness. And wealth becomes proof of virtue. Control becomes proof of strength. Disagreement becomes betrayal. However, underneath all of this armor is the same childhood fear, shame, and powerlessness that they refuse to feel. So they orbit farther from reality, from empathy, from accountability, and therefore from humanity. Fragile egos with unchecked power become dangerous. This is hard for society to understand because we don't struggle with the truth. We struggle with what it means. We have to struggle with the idea that wealth is not character. Authority is not morality. Institutions protect themselves. That some women enforce patriarchy. Accountability always threatens power. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's where the truth lives. And right now, we are at a fork in the road. Will the Epstein files be released? Maybe. I don't know. But I do know this. It is easier to exile one monster than confront the system that created him. Healing requires honesty. And so what can we do? How can we build something safer? We stop another Epstein by teaching consent as autonomy, not compliance. Children learn their bodies are theirs. We raise boys to regulate emotion, not dominate others. And that means fathers and mothers have to learn that strength is self-regulation, empathy, and accountability. We have to start expecting transparency as the cost of power. No more secrecy that's sold as protection of the vulnerable. We have to honor survivors instead of doubting them into silence. We have to shift from prove it to you deserve safety and truth. And we have to value moral practice over moral performance. If it does not translate into moral behavior, we have got to question it. Real integrity is quiet. It's humble. It's consistent. We feel it. It is consistent and accountable. None of this is radical. It's healthy humanity. And I want to say this as I close. Epstein was not powerful. He was empty. His circle was not elite. It was emotionally stunted wealth. His enablers didn't protect victims. They protected their proximity to power. And if we continue to believe that only monsters do harm, we will miss the everyday grooming, power imbalance, and boundary violations happening all around us. Safety is built by learning to recognize it, question it, and hold it accountable. Survivors aren't weak. They adapted to survive. And real strength protects the vulnerable. False strength is what preys on them. We are not going to heal the world by hunting one monster. We will heal it by creating a world where monsters cannot hide amongst wealth and respectability. And to any survivors of any exploitation listening, I want to acknowledge that you adapted, you endured. The failures were not yours. Your voice matters. And the collective we are not done telling the truth. Okay, let's all take a breath. This is heavy content. I want to remind you that if you feel activated, unsettled, or heavy right now, that makes sense. Your body is responding to truth. And truth, although painful, affects the nervous system in a way that is calming. What I talked about today is not just history, it's the present. It's the cultural air that we all breathe, the systems we move through, the unconscious ways that we decide who we believe and who we protect. If this episode felt big, good. It should feel big. Because healing requires honesty, and honesty requires courage. Again, to the survivors who may be listening, I want to say, again, your reactions are valid. Your story matters. Your nervous system did what it needed to do to protect you. And the fact that you are here, alive, listening, thinking, questioning, and speaking is evidence of your strength. To the rest of us who are listening, we do not create a safer world through silence or denial or actively avoiding. We create it through truth, boundaries, accountability, and protecting the vulnerable consistently and collectively. And remember, strength is not domination. Strength is responsibility. It's the capacity to see harm and refuse to look away. Thank you for sitting with me today in the truth of this episode, for choosing awareness over comfort and choosing humanity over hierarchy. May we all move forward with clearer eyes, steadier hearts, and deeper commitment to building a world where no one's power depends on someone else's fear and vulnerability. At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie. This podcast is solely for information and education and does not constitute therapy, nor should it replace competent professional help. Prayer of the Perfectionist. Nobody has time for perfection. We are pursuing progress. Help me remember that the only step I need to focus on is the next right step for me. Help me not forget that life is a journey. Help me separate what I am learning from what I have to do. Help me remember that I am not alone. I can ask for help. Help me to strive for frequent awakenings, not mastery. I am enough. Amen.